Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Virtual Visioning Workshop for Saugus United 2035. Without further ado, I want to get us started, so I'm going to pass the mic, as it were, to Mr. Crabtree for a welcome message.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to welcome everyone to this different format with being virtual. But I did want to acknowledge the Board of Selectmen and this administration's priority in trying to look to the future and make sure that we have input from the residents and appointed and elected officials so that we can plan and have more definitive ideas of where the future lies for Saugus in this these changing times. I also want to thank the MSBA, the MAPC for their assistance, and as well as, I guess, really a concerted effort and support from not only the Board of Selectmen as this being a priority for us, but Finance Committee and Town Meeting in their wisdom to fund this endeavor and something that is much needed in Saugus. So I do want to, and I'm sure they'll cover this, but this is sort of the first, public opportunity for people to give input. This will stay open and we'll continue to have open comment periods and continue to develop this as a fluid document and information. So I'm sure they'll cover that, but I'll turn it back over to you. And I just want to say thank you very much. We appreciate everyone's effort in this.
Great, thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Kuschel. I'm joined by Christian, who's helping facilitate tonight's meeting and also is heading up our community engagement, as well as Ralph Wilmer, who will be helping me present tonight, and we're working very closely on this. This project, we're calling it Saugus United. It's your master plan. We hope the name sort of connotes inclusiveness and a development of a shared vision within the town. Obviously, in normal times, the way that tonight would work would be a bit different. We'd probably be giving a presentation, and then there would be probably some sort of open house, and people would walk around to these different stations of these various topics. Obviously, tonight we're doing it remotely. I know this might be different for a lot of you. I will say maybe a silver lining is that at least it's easier for a lot of people to attend. You don't need to get into your car and drive here. You don't have to worry about arranging for babysitting, etc. So for tonight, Ralph and I, we're going to give a fairly brief presentation covering this project. Right now, we are sort of focused on developing the vision component to this, to the plan. And so I'll talk about that. We'll also talk about how this plan is being organized and introduce the various topics. We'll then have some time for Q&A. We'll explain how you can do that. And that's really the heart of, or I should say the heart of this part of the work is getting feedback from you. And so we're going to be primarily doing that through what we're calling a virtual open house. And so we'll provide the details and a link for that. I would love it if people navigated to the site after the presentation, if you have time, and spend some time reading through the topics in a little more detail, providing feedback and answering the various questions that we have posed throughout. This virtual open house, it's not going to take 5 minutes. It's a little bit more in-depth than that. Hopefully it's not too onerous. And I'm still hoping even with that, everyone will still have plenty of time to catch the opening of the Celtics tonight. Next slide. Okay, so I also I want to emphasize that really what we're looking for from the community is to be involved and to provide your thoughts throughout the process. At this stage, the virtual open house is probably the best means to do that, but it's not the only means. We'll provide my contact info. I'm always happy to have one-on-one conversations. And also, I just want to note that this is only the first meeting of a number of meetings, so there's many ways to get involved, and we hope that you will stay engaged. Next slide. And speaking of the process, the town has appointed an advisory committee of about, I think it's about 25 members to help advise the process. These members come from a number of the town's various boards and committees. And this advisory committee, it'll be involved in a couple ways. It provides input and guidance, reviewing the various drafts of the sections of the report, as well as acting as plan ambassadors to assist in community engagement and the communication of information. And I also just want to note that this work, it's being managed and coordinated through the Planning and Economic Development Department by Chris Riley and Alex Mello, who are both on tonight. Just wanted to acknowledge that as well. Next slide. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about us at MAPC for those who are not familiar. MAPC is the regional planning agency for the Metro Boston area. So that's the 101 cities and towns, sort of essentially within the 495 belt within the region. So we have a staff of about 100 people with a pretty diverse range of expertise on a number of topics, ranging from some more typical planning activities like land use, zoning, transportation, to more really innovative areas like arts and culture, public health, clean energy. And as the regional planning agency, we wear a number of different hats. In this case, we're really acting as consultants to the town to help facilitate the creation of the plan. So the result of this work, it's not going to be an MAPC vision for Saugus. It's going to be Saugus's vision of Saugus. It'll be a plan for the town, by the town. We're very happy to be part of this process. We have a great team assembled to help support this plan. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but our work, it's only as good as the feedback that we can get. So again, we're hoping that you will help us by providing feedback. I'd also ask for everyone on here to please let your friends and relatives who live within the town know about this and give them the link to fill out the survey questions in the online open house, even if they didn't attend tonight. Next slide. Just the final thing I would say about MAPC is that we have we've completed a number of master plan processes in communities within our region, ranging from more rural communities like Boxborough to urban inner core cities such as Revere, to everything in between. Each plan, it ends up being pretty unique to the municipality based upon the content that is defined by the community. But I think overall this experience, it helps provide us with a framework and expertise to help facilitate these processes and draw out the information that is needed to help compose a plan that's meaningful and useful to the community. Next slide. So what is a master plan? This is a document that looks, in this case, we're looking about 15 years out. It's an opportunity to envision your future over that time frame, and it's a plan to help you achieve that vision. So it's a document. It's also a process. And at the end of this plan, you're going to have probably dozens and dozens of various goals. So the end of the master plan is also in some ways really the beginning of the process then to help achieve the vision. Next slide. So communities they're constantly changing, both physically and who's living in them. That's sort of the one constant, is the fact that there's always change. There's a quote that I really like that I heard is from Abraham Lincoln, although to be honest, I don't know if it's true, but either way, the quote is, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I think in some ways that's what really at the heart of what a master plan does. It helps define how is a community, in this case Saugus, going to grow. What is it going to protect? What are the priorities for investment? And overall, how are we going to make Saugus a better place for its residents, its workers, and its visitors? Next. Now, this specific plan, kind of transitioning to the Saugus United document, there's a number of different ways to organize a master plan. There's not really any one way that's correct, but the way that we're proceeding as of now, the master plan has 3 components. First is what we're calling the baseline report. This is your snapshot of your existing conditions in your town. We're kind of keeping this all together because some people, they just love data. They want to get into it and they want to kind of see, all of these details. For others, I think this section might be a little bit less relevant. Some people are more interested in kind of the more forward-looking aspects of the master plan. And so we've separated this baseline report from what I'm calling the roadmap. This is the heart of the report. It's the main policy document. It's going to articulate the vision and describe all the various elements with the goals. We have these organized by theme, which I'll explain in a minute. And then the final part of the master plan is what we're calling the action plan. Sometimes it's called an implementation plan. So this is how do we actually achieve the various recommendations? Who is responsible for it? What are these at least suggested timeframes to help work towards this vision that's developed? Next slide. So looking a little bit closer at the roadmap, we have this organized, what we call these various elements into themes. So there's the vision, which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. And then these other themes are really organized around how do we live in our communities. So how do we live, work, play, connect, meaning how do we get around, and protect. So in a few minutes, I'm going to hand this over to Ralph, and he'll introduce each of the topics within those themes in a little bit more detail. Next slide. So this slide helps sort of summarize the process, and this is expected to be about a 2-year process overall. That tends to be fairly typical for master plans. We really started this past spring, obviously with COVID hitting, things got delayed in some ways to a bit. But what we have been doing up until now is kind of behind the scenes work, where we've really been trying to get our heads wrapped around all the existing conditions for the various elements. So we've been mainly focused on that. And now we're transitioning where we are now into the vision and goals. So there's some overlap. So we're still wrapping up the existing conditions, but we're now really trying to get focused on the vision and the goals portion of this. This is then going to be broken down into more detail with goals in each of the various elements of the master plan, which will then ultimately result in pretty specific strategies and actions to inform the implementation plan. The Master Plan Advisory Committee, we will be meeting with them regularly throughout, and there will also be a program of various engagement opportunities, again, depending on the type of feedback and the topic at that moment in the process. Next slide, please. So I want to describe just a little bit more about the community vision, which is really what we're working on now. It articulates a future for Saugus, and then helps lead towards the various goals and recommendations in the plan. As I've noted several times, it's developed by the community, so we want to incorporate as many voices as possible. It also needs to strike a balance. So it needs to be broad enough to encapsulate the town, but it also has to be meaningful. So as an example, saying in Saugus we want to have a high quality of life, that doesn't really mean that much. For one thing, it means different things to different people. It's also, everybody wants a high quality of life. So a better vision would sort of articulate what does a high quality of life mean in Saugus. For example, that might be everyone has access to quality open spaces, there are great schools, etc. Then at the same time, we don't want to be so specific that we end up, frankly, alienating certain segments of the population. So as an example, we would probably want to avoid saying, every person in Saugus, our vision is that you will have a single family home with a big yard, right? Because lots of people probably want that, but we know that there are some people who either are unable to have that or do not want that. If you're a senior, you might want to downsize into a different type of home. So that's what I mean by striking that balance. Next sec. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can go one more slide, Christian, sorry. The final thing I just want to mention as it relates to this vision is that each of these various elements will then have its own goals and its strategies that help achieve the vision. And so everything should eventually lead back to the overarching vision. So if there are goals and strategies in the various elements that do not support the vision, it either means we need to go back to the vision and make some changes, or that goal and strategy is just frankly not applicable to this master plan. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ralph then to introduce the topics in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all for attending. Can advance to the next slide, please. So I'm going to get into a little bit more detail about the contents of the plan and some of the topics that we'll be covering. So just to set the stage, we just want to make sure that people understand where this process is heading, and you know, just to help with defining the community vision, but also to help you focus on how you know, how people can get involved and offer us input and feedback into the process. For each topic, we'll be using information from previous planning processes. It's important to note that the town, this is not the first town plan of any type. The town has undertaken a number of planning initiatives, and we're going to build on that. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to utilize the information that's relevant from a number of these plans, some of which are either ongoing or were completed fairly recently. And we're going to look at the current data and get your feedback to help define the goals and strategies and actions that should occur over the next 10 to 15 years. And we would like you to help us understand what the most pressing challenges and opportunities are in Saugus, and this is going to be the first of several opportunities that the public will have to get involved in the process. So just to sort of set the stage, obviously the geographic context of the plan is really the boundaries of the town of Saugus, but at the same time, we'll be looking at things as relevant from a regional context as well. So we'll be learning as much as we can about every corner of the town and addressing the rich variety of places that make up. Next slide, please. So Christian, who you've all met, will be leading the community engagement aspect of the plan, and that'll be going on throughout the entire year and a half to 2 years that we have left to complete the plan. So it's important that in order to achieve success with the plan, we need input from a broad range of community members and residents. So to create that inclusive and equitable process, Christian and his team has created a community engagement plan that'll sort of guide the process. And then obviously, as Chris mentioned, we'll be working with the advisory committee that's been established and the planning department to try and reach as broad an audience as possible. We've been analyzing the demographics of each of the neighborhoods and learning about the social networks and connections so that we can get word out to people around the town, key stakeholders, and to get people engaged. So we invite you to help us with that. As Chris mentioned earlier, you know, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, see if they're interested in getting involved, and we'll provide the opportunities to do so. Next slide, please. So under the theme of living, one of the important elements of the plan is the land use plan, which Chris and I will be taking the lead on. The map shows existing land uses in Saugus, and it's important for me to just note quickly that you'll see maps on all of these slides. You'll be able to view those maps and other information related to them in the open house portion of this forum that'll start tonight and go on for weeks thereafter. So you can start to look at some of the same information that we're starting to look at. So this is a land use map that shows existing land use in the town, and we'll be looking at current uses, land uses within the town. So that includes looking at the town's history and evolution. Where do people live? Where do they shop? Where do they work? Where do they go to for recreation? What is the character of the town in its various places? And we'll also be looking at the zoning bylaw. The zoning is the regulatory framework that helps to guide the future development in the town. We'll be looking at land uses. We'll be looking at things included in the zoning, such as parking regulations and determining where housing should go and where, whether or not to encourage more affordable housing, how much open space is in the town, and whether open space requirements are being met. We'll be looking at the dimensional standards, such as the height of buildings in each of the zoning districts. The town is divided into a number of zoning districts, so we'll be looking at all of that as part of the analysis that we'll be undertaking. Next slide. So the next element will be led by John McCartan, who's one of our housing planners, and this will be looking at housing specifically. Housing is obviously a very important issue in a number of communities. A housing production plan was prepared recently for the town of Saugus. So we'll be building on the work done at that point. And we understand that housing is always a hot button issue in a lot of communities. We know that there's a current housing moratorium, so we'll be looking at the master plan as an opportunity to coalesce around a vision for housing and to develop strategies for growth in a reasonable and applicable manner. And we understand that, on one hand, Saugus would be looking to ensure that it's considered to be an affordable community. We also know that housing development or development of any kind usually winds up raising some concerns, whether it's traffic or impacts on schools. And all of this will be addressed in this master plan, early in this episode. Next slide, please. So another important issue to look at are the town facilities and services. Courtney Lewis will be leading this effort. Here we have a map that shows where all the major facilities are in town: town hall, the library, the schools, DPW, fire and police, and so on and so forth. So we'll be looking at all of those various departments and focusing on strategies to ensure that services and facilities are up to date and in locations that serve the community as best they can. So a lot of this involves how the town does its capital improvement planning, because when you look at things like new police stations, fire stations, improvements, these are all large capital improvements, and it's important to try and identify what the needs are and to try and prioritize how and when those improvements will be made. Next slide. So this falls under the theme of work, and it focuses on economic development, which will be led by Jen Kaplan, one of our economic development planners. And this will include an analysis of industry clusters, commercial areas, composition of the workforce, And we'll be looking at a variety of policies, zoning, permitting regulations, and land use constraints as they relate to economic development and where the opportunities are to build the town's tax. Next slide, please. So now we get a little bit more into the fun part of the plan, the play theme. Courtney, again, will be helping us out with this. The town has recently adopted an open space and recreation plan, and that'll serve as the basis for this element of the plan. So we'll be double checking the goals and objectives and strategies from that open space plan, making sure that implementation of that plan is on track. And we'll be focusing on how the town's open space amenities are used and accessed in this master plan element, and then just building on the open space and rec plan to see if some of the recommendations from that plan need to be updated. Next slide, please. So again, this is part of the play theme, and this will look at arts and cultural resources. So as Chris mentioned, this is something that's not typically addressed in a master plan, but we've been doing it more and more. We have an arts and culture department, so they'll be helping us, Claudia Razua and Emma Boast. We'll be looking at how the town can further promote creative industries to be an asset. And this ties to some extent with economic development. So we'll be looking at ways in which the town can build on its numerous resources to create opportunities for people to play and grow in the town. Next slide, please. So under the theme of connect, Chris mentioned this is how we get around. Transportation element that'll be led by Travis Pollock and Mara Holland. Here we'll be looking at everything relating to the town's transportation infrastructure and how people get around in the town, because that's an important part of one's quality of life. And here we'll be looking at trying to create more efficient multimodal transportation networks to address the needs of automobile users, public and private mass transit, bus service, and things along those lines, how people get around by bicycle, and how to create better connections for pedestrians. So this will be a very important element, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of good input on this topic. Next slide, please. So now under the theme of protect, we'll be looking at energy sustainability and resiliency. So again, this is a topic that isn't always covered in a master plan, but we find that it's very important to address this. Julie Purdy and Ann Herbst will be leading the effort here. And this will be looking at how to reduce demand and greenhouse gas emissions through increased efficiency, green technologies, new construction standards, things along those lines. And MAPC has secured some additional funding through the Barr Foundation to include more work on this particular topic. We'll be looking at this element to incorporate some of the ongoing work that Courtney is actually leading in the production of the Municipal Vulnerability Plan and Hazard Mitigation Plan. So it's a map that shows flooding zones throughout the town. So, you know, these are obviously very important issues which have come to more light in recent days or elsewhere around the country. Slide, please. So Claudia and Emma will also be looking at how to best protect our historic and cultural resources in Saugus. So it's slightly different from what we are covering in their other chapter on arts and culture, but there are obviously a lot of historic resources within the town, and there are strategies that a number of towns have used to ensure long-term protection of those resources. And that is what focused on. Next slide, please. So finally, environmental stewardship. This is somewhat connected to some of the previous chapters dealing with open space and recreation, and to some extent with the sustainability and resiliency chapter, but Courtney will continue to sort of tie the loose ends together in terms of natural resource protection and things along those lines that will also be covered to some extent in the open recreation chapter. So it'll focus a little bit more on environmental issues. And this is a map that shows areas of potential public health risks. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight here is that, again, not usual for a lot of master plans, but we've been doing this in more and more of our master plans, is to look at the impacts of public health as it relates to some of the other chapters. So many of the other chapters, whether it's housing or transportation, or open space and natural resources, all have some impact on public health. We'll be trying to tie all those topics together by incorporating public health input into the discussion will be covered in each of the chapters. So with that, I believe I am turning it back over to Christian to sort of take us through the next steps and talk a little bit more about how you can participate.
Great, thank you so much for all that information, Chris and Rolf. So there are a couple of ways after this meeting that you can stay involved in the project. So the first is that we recommend that you visit the project website, which is on the screen, but it is just the name of the plan. So saugusunited2035.org. On that website, you'll be able to find all of the documents from today, as well as the recording, as well as a link to the open house, which we'll get to in the next slide. In addition, on that website, you can sign up to join our mailing list so that you can stay updated about events for the project. That's a really great way to get added to like email blasts about an upcoming forum, for example. You can also email Chris directly with any of your comments, and his email is on the screen. So those are some ways to continue being involved. So I'll go to the next slide. So for tonight, we're going to get to the question and answer period in just a little bit. But after this, we would love for each of you to participate in our virtual open house. So the virtual open house has some additional background information for each of the topics that we discussed today, as well as an opportunity to give your feedback in some questions for each topic as well. So that is an excellent place for us to be able to gather the information that we really need in order to help craft a vision. So please, at the end of this meeting, take some time to visit the open house, share the link widely, send it to your family, send it to your friends. There's really no person in Saugus who shouldn't get the link. So as many people as you want to send it to, the more the merrier. And that virtual open house will be live starting tonight through Friday, October 4th, at which point we'll close the open house so we can get through the data and figure out what everyone's saying. So without further ado, I'll go back to this slide and I'll also share the open house link in the chat. But without further ado, I'm going to get us into the question and answer period. So the screen just has some instructions about how you can ask questions. You can either raise your hand, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your Zoom window with the little hand emoji. So if you click on that, it will show up in the attendees list and we'll answer, we'll promote you to being a panelist so that you can ask your question, and then we'll move you back to the attendees list. And we'll do that in the order that we have received hands. Or if you don't necessarily want to talk in front of everybody, please feel free to also post your question in the question and answer box, which you will also be able to find down on the bottom of your Zoom window. So we actually already had a couple of questions. So I will pose those to the panelists, and that way we can get started. So the first question was, will there be an opportunity for any members of the public to be part of the advisory committee, or will it be department heads only?
Well, I think, you know, as of now, the idea was that the advisory committee was part of the, where it was from department heads. I think that could be something we can discuss if there's a strong desire from members of the public to be on that committee. You know, I think, again, the advisory committee is only, you know, they help guide the process, but, you know, there's lots of opportunities for the general public also to really be involved. But that's certainly something we can look into and discuss with the town staff.
Great, thanks, Chris. So the next question that we got was, will there be a specific traffic and transportation planning session?
Yes, so each of these elements that Ralph had presented on, we are going to be diving a lot deeper into them. And traffic is, of course, going to be one of them. So the exact format and the exact timing for that right now, we don't quite know, but it'll likely be transportation with one or more other elements sort of as part of another meeting that we'll kind of be able to really dig into a much more digestible set of recommendations and vision elements for those various topics.
And when we get into those sessions on specific topics, we will have done a lot more research on existing conditions and the data collection and analysis. So we'll be able to do a much deeper dive into those topics than you know, for instance, some of the information that you might see on the website now and in the open house session related to this public forum. So we'll be able to get a lot more specific input on any issues and questions that you have, you know, focusing on transportation, you know, issues like, you know, where are sidewalks needed, you know, where are pedestrian and bike connections most important, what types of intersections are most problematic either from a congestion or a safety point of view. So we can do a much deeper dive when we get into this process in more detail, so that we can get some more specific input from all of you later on in the process.
So I see that Mr. Rossetti has his hand raised. We did receive one more question during the presentation, so I'll answer that. And then Mr. Rossetti, I will unmute you so that you can ask your question. So what are the possibilities for having a survey on risk management and liability prevention, specifically on existing roadways?
I'm not sure if I 100% understand the question, but I think as Ralph was saying, you know, as when we look at the transportation section, we are going to be looking at things like crash data, for example. We are also going to be asking the community, what are the areas that you feel are most dangerous or need improvements? So we will be sort of addressing that question, I think, from that way. I'm not sure if that's exactly what Mr. Sacco is asking.
Mr. Sacco, if you want to add another question or post in the chat, just clarifying that. But if that answers your question, then we'll move on. So Mr. Rossetti, I'm going to enable you to talk. So you should be able to, yes, I see you've unmuted yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, I submitted a question and I had also raised my hand, but the question was, can we get a copy of this presentation? Is that available online, and can the public get that also?
Christian, go ahead. You can answer.
Yeah, so the presentation will be available on the project website. And it is part of the public record, so it is available to the public. I can't recall off the top of my head whether or not you can download these from the project website, but we can make it available to members of the public should they be interested in receiving it.
Okay, I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in it just for the format, if nothing else.
Great. Is that all? Do you have another question, or is that?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right.
At the moment.
Thank you so much. So next, I see that Deborah Panetta has a question. So you should be all set to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you very much for conducting this meeting. I just have a couple of quick questions. In terms of next steps, where you said that you're going to be doing additional research, I'm going to assume that you're going to be reaching out, for example, under the topic of the environment, to maybe Saugus Action Volunteers for the Environment, the Saugus River Watershed Council, when you were talking about transportation and somebody talked about bicycles, and Bike to the Sea would be a great resource. I'm just curious on next steps and how you're going to be getting input on each one of these categories from the public. That's my first question. My second question, and this is a follow-up to Mr. Rossetti's question, you mentioned that you were going to put this information on the project website. Now, is that the project website the same as our Town of Saugus website? Is there going to be a category under the Town of Saugus where people can go in and see this project? Or do they have to go to a different, an MAPC website to take a look at it? Because I'd like to see it on our town website if that's possible. And my last question is regarding the specific topics. When are those meetings going to get started? And how often is the advisory committee going to be meeting, and can members of the public also attend those meetings? Thank you.
Okay, there were a number of questions there. I'll try and remember and address them all. So the first question had to do with the fact that there are a number of organizations throughout town that are applicable to the various elements. And so the answer is, to the extent that we know of these organizations, we will be engaging with them. And so each of the leads on the various topic areas will be meeting with all of as many applicable, whether it's town boards, outside agencies, nonprofits, et cetera, that are relevant. We'll be looking to the town to help us identify those organizations in some cases, although of course we know who they are in many times as well, and that's a big part of the work that Christian has been doing, is helping to organize that. Question in terms of the presentation and where it will be. At a minimum, it will be on the website that you see on the screen right now, saugusunited2035.org. I would highly recommend that the town also put it on their website. Obviously, members of the town are on tonight, and to the extent that they are able to put it on the town website, I think that would be very helpful. So hopefully that can get done. I know that there was one more question. Christian, maybe you can help me.
I'm just looking at the chat. Mr. Crabtree indicated that it will be on the town website as well.
Great.
I also don't remember the third question. I'm so sorry, Deborah. If you wouldn't, you should still be able to unmute yourself. If you wouldn't mind asking that again for us, that would be really helpful.
Maybe we can come back to her, Christian, if she's able to.
Oh, it looks like she just posted, I can't unmute. I will. So you should be unmuted.
Now I can talk. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I can't unmute myself. You have to unmute me. So my last question was on the specific topics. You alluded to having separate meetings on the various topics that you reviewed with us this evening. I'd like to know when those meetings, a timeline, when are those meetings going to start, and how often will the advisory committee be meeting, and can the public attend those meetings?
Yeah, so Christian, maybe if you want to just scroll back quickly to the slide that has the kind of that high level summary that sort of explains. So, you know, right now, probably through the, at least the next several months, where we're really working on the visioning portion of this. Really, once we kind of are almost buttoned up with that, that's when we are going to start on the specific topics, and that's really the largest part of this project. I don't know the exact timing for when the various meetings would take place, or at this point, which topics are going to be addressed exactly when. We will, as we get closer, we'll be providing as much advance notice as possible so that people can be involved with those. In terms of the advisory committee, these are generally, my understanding is they are open to the public, but they're not generally, the best venue for members of the community to participate. They're more than welcome to, and so, again, that will be publicly posted in accordance with open meeting laws as required.
Great. Deborah, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I just know that there's been a lot of talk over the years of this master plan. There are many of us that are very excited to see this kickoff this evening and want to be involved and learn as much as they can. So I want people to be able to lend their voice to the process as we move forward.
Great. I think that actually that's a really good reminder that if you have suggestions for folks to touch base with, or people who should be engaged, you can always shoot me an email. I can include my email in the chat so that anyone who's interested can get in touch with me, so we can network our way into talking to everybody.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you. So the next question that we have is from AB, and they posted that in the question and answer, and there's actually two parts. So I'll just ask the first part first, and that is, what are some of the challenges, 2 or 3, that you currently foresee might be an impediment to implementing your vision?
Well, I guess this is, I don't know, I mean, as a general question, I think, one of the things that often gets derailed is you make this great plan, but then you don't really have the bandwidth or the ability to implement it, just because, members of town staff are already stretched as it is. And so you might have this great innovative idea, but it can be really difficult. So, the way that we try to address this, I think, is by having the various recommendations be achievable and be realistic, and having there be accountability in terms of how these things will be addressed and when and who is responsible for them. And then, one of the benefits to MAPC, I think, is, as a sort of quasi-state agency, is that when we finish this master plan, we don't, necessarily just pick up and go home. We are here to help support our communities, including Saugus, to help achieve the various recommendations and address any challenges that might come up.
I would add, there are always going to be some of the more obvious challenges that could be an impediment to implementation. But, one of the things that we want to make sure that we do in this plan is, through the implementation program, as Chris was mentioning, we're going to identify what the key recommendations are. We're going to try and prioritize them so that you can work through them in a systematic timeline. We're going to identify which entity is responsible for implementing it. It might be the Conservation Commission, it might be the Planning Board, it might be the Planning Department. It could be any number of those entities. And clearly, if there are funding sources, grants, and so on, we want to identify them. But to get back to my original statement, money is going to be an obvious impediment. And, I can imagine that there will be some recommendations that are going to require some sort of investment from the town. And, those have to be balanced against other needs. So, financing is a typical impediment that we see in a number of our planning efforts. And then to some extent, there are other sort of wild cards. We may make some recommendations for zoning changes, and we can make those recommendations, but we cannot predict how town meeting will address them. And as is the case in any community across Massachusetts or across the country for that matter, some of these processes are political, and that is a challenge that needs to be met down the road when implementing a plan, to make sure that people understand what the choices are, and to understand why a particular recommendation is made so that it can be supported down the line.
So the second part of that question, it looks like we have about 3 questions left. So if you have anything to ask, make sure you get it in now. And if we don't have time to answer it now, we can also connect with you afterwards via email. But it looks like the second part of that question is, in terms of data analysis and analytics, would that be done in-house, or would you be leveraging outside resources or seek out community members, I'm assuming community members, to help who are trained in that discipline?
Sure. So as part of this process, all of the work, all of the analysis, and any materials that are produced, whether they're maps or other types of analytics, are going to be produced by MAPC. We're not subcontracting with anybody for any aspects. We didn't include a slide on that, but we have, as part of our team, members of our data services group, and they can do some really amazing types of analysis and they're supporting each of the staff members working on the various elements.
Great. I see that Mr. Vecchione has his hand raised, but we do have one quick question, I think, from Jeffrey Williamson, who asked, when is it planned for the master plan to be adopted by the town? And can it be used for any purpose / considered when taking actions by the town before it is adopted?
Ralph, do you want to address that?
Yeah, if I understand, first of all, in terms of the timing, we're looking at the end of 2021 for adoption of the plan. Excuse me. The requirement from a legal point of view is that the plan has to be adopted by the planning board. Some communities bring it to a board of selectmen. Some communities also bring a master plan to town meeting, for instance. But the only legal requirement is that it has to officially be adopted by the planning board at a vote at one of their regularly scheduled meetings. And at this point, we're thinking that that'll be toward the end of 2021. If I understand the other part of the question, as a planner, I would prefer that implementation of the plan occur once the plan is adopted, especially if you're thinking about things like zoning regulations or significant financial investments based on the plan. But at the same time, you want to take advantage of opportunities that are presented to you. So for instance, if we're recommending something that's related to a particular grant program, and the grant applications are due in the fall, but we feel that there's consensus for supporting that recommendation and supporting that grant application, then it makes sense to try and take advantage of those opportunities to sort of implement or move toward implementation of that recommendation to some extent in advance of formal adoption. And there's no legal reason why you couldn't like that. Hopefully that answers the question.
We do have one hand raised. So Mr. Vecchione, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question. So you should be good to go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. How you doing, guys? So thanks for doing this. I think it's a great step forward for the town. But I just wanted, and you may have partially answered this, I may have missed it, but can you provide a little bit more insight into the deliverable as to whether it'll be similar to past reports furnished by the MAPC, where it's a final freestanding document that's released at the end of the process, or will this process be more of a fluid and ongoing process addressing some of the more urgent issues in town, such as decline at Cliffordale Square or infrastructural shortcomings, or our construction moratoriums ending next spring, and the effects that may have on development on Route 1 and the permits we'll be receiving?
Well, the master plan itself will end up being a final document that won't be finalized until the end of this process. That'll be, nearly 2 years from now. I'm hoping at least, substantial drafts of the three sort of components that I mentioned, meaning the baseline report, the body of, or the roadmap, and the action plan could be in some ways done separately. So you would have some parts done before others. As it relates, though, to, I think, your concern of the fact that, time doesn't stand still. So even over the next couple years, you're probably going to be looking for some direction. I think as the recommendations and the analysis is being completed, that can certainly be shared, when the time is ready, even if it's before the actual full master plan is actually finalized and adopted. And we would certainly be sharing that with the town for them to distribute as ready.
Great, thank you. I am going to, we got one question from Mr. Riley in the question and answer box. So that is, MAPC has developed many master plans, gaining valuable experience. Now that you've been involved with Saugus for a few months, can you share any initial impressions, e.g. what obvious opportunities, risks, concerns jump out to you?
I think many of our communities are concerned about impacts related to the construction, especially of new housing. And I know, Saugus is experiencing, or was experiencing, quite a bit of growth because of its, sort of enviable position, very close to Boston. And so I think sort of in what I consider an obvious sort of concern that I think is going to come up is concern related to new construction of housing. And that's something that we will be, of course, addressing in a lot of detail as we move forward. But I think that's something that is probably on our minds that we're kind of ready to think about. And then the second thing that I think is, again, especially a community like Saugus that does not have a commuter rail station or train. I know there are some bus lines, but it's not transit rich the way other communities close to Boston are. And so, thinking about the impacts of new development and just as we grow, how are we getting around? I think it's untenable just to keep building for vehicles. Obviously, the vehicles are not going away, but I think we need to think of ways to mitigate traffic impacts as development occurs, not just within Saugus, but in the surrounding towns, because obviously Route 1 is a way that people get to the North Shore, for example. So those are kind of the two things that at least are on my mind. I don't know if, Ralph, you have anything else that you want to add?
Well, in terms of opportunities, I think there are a couple of unique ones in Saugus. The ironworks is certainly one that jumps out, and there's a lot of civic and local pride associated with that. And then you look at places like Breakheart Reservation, which is a regional open space that is also one that provides a lot of opportunities for people not only in Saugus but from surrounding communities as well. So, that's not necessarily unique to Saugus. A lot of other towns have state parks and state forest land, but when we did our tour of the town in the spring, there were parts of Breakheart that really jumped out at me as being particularly interesting and unique.
I think we have one more question from Mr. Law, so I'm going to unmute you, and you should be good to go in a moment. There we go.
Yes, my question is, how can historic organizations help to assist this process?
Yeah, so Emma and Claudia are working on that. Emma is one of our, a fellow focused very much on the sort of historic preservation, interpretation of history. If there is a specific organization that you're thinking of, we would love to connect you or that organization with Emma.
Okay, can I have a contact information?
Yeah, I mean, her email, probably the easiest thing would be to provide for you to send me an email, which, Christian, can you just put that up? I think it's the previous slide. And then I can be happy to make that connection.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right. So I don't think we have any additional questions and no raised hands. So I think now is a great time to remind folks, again, some other ways to connect. Visit the project website, which is where you'll be able to access both the recording of this presentation and the presentation itself. Also on the website, you can join the mailing list, and always welcome to connect with Chris directly by email. And then the next page is for the Visioning Open House. So I'm going to include that in the chat for everyone. Make sure I spelled it correctly. There we go. So that link will take you directly to the open house that contains some more feedback opportunities based on the presentation that you just heard. And again, that open house will be available from tonight until October 4th, which somebody in the chat let us know that that is a Sunday, but it'll be open until October 4th, whether or not it's a Sunday or a Friday. So maybe that will enable you to spend some time on the weekend answering the open house questions. So I think unless there are any other questions, I will pass this over to Chris for some final closing remarks.
Thank you again, everybody, for attending. If you have the time, and you have the time now to go to the open house online, please do. If you don't have a chance to finish the open house, my understanding is it will actually save your answers, so you don't have to complete it all in one sitting, assuming you're using the same computer. So yep. Please feel free to go to that. Again, we just ask for you to share it. Send me any emails if you have any questions. I'd be happy to talk on the phone as well. And just thank you, and we're looking forward to continuing our work with the town on this pretty exciting endeavor.
Right. So we'll hang out for a little bit, but again, thank you all so much for coming and spending your Tuesday evening with us.
Yeah, so maybe I would just add, we'll stay on, or a few of us, we don't need to all stay on, but maybe Christian, you and I can stay on for about 10 minutes if people navigate to the open house but have any sort of question with how to work the technology. We'll just stay on so that you can still either raise your hand or put a comment into us, and we can try and help you on that. Christian, somebody has raised their hand. And you're on mute, Christian.
Classic. You should be good to go, Deborah.
Thank you. So just so that I'm clear, the next steps are that people need to go through the visioning open house. And how long will that take for people to go through?
It should take around 10 to 15 minutes. The way that it's organized
Okay.
is by element, and the questions, each element is voluntary. So no one has to answer all the elements, although we obviously would love for everybody to answer questions about all the elements. But if someone's only interested in housing, they can just go to the housing part.
So that's going to be closed on October 4th, and then you're going to consolidate all the information and give it back to the town?
Yep. So what we'll be doing is we'll be synthesizing that information, and then we will come up with a draft of what the vision is, and then we would be presenting that to the town, to the advisory committee, to help refine that vision, because we want to get that right. The questions that are being asked within the various elements, in addition to helping inform the vision, they also will help each of those elements know sort of the areas that, to kind of focus on and dig deeper. And so it's being used in kind of a couple ways. But yes, in generally speaking, yeah, you'll be waiting to hear from us, and we'll be working on that as diligently as possible.
Okay, so in each section, how many questions are there? Like, what type of questions I'll go myself, but I'm just curious to, you're giving people a little less than a month, 3 weeks or so to go on. That should be enough time for people to, but we need to make sure that people know that that's out there. So we need the press to put this in the paper, and we need to advertise, because we want to get we want everyone's voice to be heard. But once you get that information and you consolidate it, you're going to make assumptions based on that information?
Yeah, I wouldn't call them assumptions. I think I would call it a synthesis. Christian, I did just note, there's from Mr. Crabtree a note about if the meeting is over, you cannot continue the public meeting. So I don't know if we just, are assuming that this meeting technically is still open. This isn't, a public board meeting. So I'm not sure the answer to that.
I don't necessarily know the answer to that, but I think what we could do is, if this is useful, I'm happy to connect with you, Deborah, on the phone tomorrow to answer some more of those questions.
Okay. No, that's fine. I have a Board of Selectmen meeting at 7 o'clock anyway. It's just, I want to go through the visioning before we speak. But I do think there's a lot of, we'll call them town experts, that I think can give you some information as well. People that have been moderators for many, many years, people that, environmentalists, people that, they kind of know of the hot spots and different things in town. Many people are very concerned about, as somebody alluded to earlier, about the housing and development and zoning. There's been so much work that's been done around the town. I was just kind of curious how, when all of that information is consolidated, and when you finalize it I would say finalize it, when you close the survey down on October 4th, I assume it's going to take you a couple of weeks to consolidate it and put together your analysis and send it out to the town to review. I assume it would go to the advisory committee first, or maybe the town manager and then the advisory committee.
Yes, that's correct.
And also, Mr. Crabtree, I've unmuted you, so if you want to respond, you should be fine to go. Oh, I think you just were muted again. Hold on. There,
can you hear me? Okay. So I would just caution, because you announced that I'm sorry, is somebody speaking? I just would caution, because you had announced that the meeting was ended, and then almost half the participants dropped off, and then you're continuing questions and answers as if the meeting's continuing, and it may not be, there may be things that people are missing, or we should have just kept the meeting going. But I think that I'm concerned about that, not from, just from a standpoint of people think that the meeting's over and now it's continuing on with more questions.
Yeah.
So we should probably talk about this and how, to conclude or not conclude. But, I just have concerns with almost half the people dropping off.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Crabtree. That's a good point. I think the intent had been for us at this point to stay on just in case people had questions about the technology, as opposed to continuing with questions. And when I say the technology, I mean about the website for the open house, not for continuing to give sort of more general questions. So I think Christian, unless you see any questions specifically about that, about the open house and how to access it, we probably should, adjourn.
Great.
I did see one question that they unfortunately thought that this meeting had started at 6. It had started at 5, but I will just say that on the SaugusUnited2035.org, this presentation will be provided, so you'll be able to get any information that you missed.
Yeah, and I think, and just to add, I think the more participation, the more people are involved, the more comments and questions, and the longer the meetings are, I'm absolutely supportive of that. When you say the meeting's over and people drop off the call, it becomes something that some of those people will have complaints and say, well, I thought the meeting was over and I didn't realize that was going to get brought up. And I've been here a long time, and that we just want to make sure that we leave it open or we close it when we conclude. That's all.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So I'll just do one more reminder, that on the project website, you will be able to access a recording of this as well as the presentation. So if you joined after the presentation started, or know someone who wanted to come but wasn't able to, that is the best place for them to go to see the content that we talked about.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you.
Log off.